We're in Unreal now, and as you can see here that I have a very simple setup with some grass and some flowers that are currently on my landscape. Now, as I mentioned before, this is a very simple version of this, and while it does do the trick, it's very plain, and we're basically going to be going through the process of how we would actually trying to make this actually a more organic field, basically. So what we'll do just to get started is that we'll go into our landscape material here, and we're going to sort of break down how we can get this and the different components that are involved with spawning grass. So we'll first make a very basic one, and then we'll build on top of it. So without further ado, let's go into the landscape material. So it's a very simple one. I'm just having two materials blend between each other based off of the slope. So just so that you guys kind of get it. You can see here there's a lot of grass, and this is also a problem that we'll be tackling. So right now we have, like, say it will spawn rock as I sculpt, right, which is very useful, right, because then I don't have to paint it. But what really matters here, actually, let me just erase that, because oh shoot, that's not erasing. Let's just press Control Z. So now that's sort of what this does, is just a simple grass layer, and then I have a paintable layer for dirt. And then I have just some runtime virtual texture stuff, which we're not going to touch today. And the height blend that's driving the auto landscaping here. Super simple, not really anything in depth, for at least this one. However, this is what we care about today, is this landscape grass in this node right here. So what this is that this node, this output node, is basically looking at this thing called a layer sample. And a layer sample is basically going to look at the weight of each layer. So think about the weight being from 0 to 1. And as we paint on our landscape, right, so say I have this dirt, as we paint, we're basically controlling how much of each layer is being painted by its weight, right? And in this case, what's going on is that if we look at the actual landscape, is that this layer 1, where it's reading, is, think about it as a black to white mask, right? So basically what I did is that everywhere around has the weight of 1, and because I painted the second layer here, I've painted out the grass because it's now a weight of 0 for layer 1, because now it's occupied by layer 2, right? So that's how this ends up happening. So how do we exactly get these nodes? Well, let's actually do that right now. So the first one obviously was that landscape grass output, right? And this is what's going to be used for spawning grass. Now, if you look over to the side, is that there is an array that we can add more indexes to, which we'll do. And we also have an option for naming the output. So if I say I call this, like, that, it will, go and rename it. So if we just have it as, say, default grass, because that's what this layer would be. And it's also asking us for a grass type. So we're not talking about, say, like a simple foliage type that you'd use for painting. There's a different type, and it's made specifically for the landscape. So if I go into my landscape folder here, under my grasses, you'll notice that I have actually a couple of these types all ready to go, right? And you can see that this one is called a landscape grass type. So let's go ahead and let's actually make one. So we can find it underneath the Create Advanced Assets Foliage in the landscape grass type. So let's go ahead and let's just create one. And let's call this, say, landscape grass demo 01, right? And what this will do is that this will be basically our default layer for the grass. So let's go ahead and let's actually open it. All right, 1 second. So inside you can see it's asking us for grass varieties. Now if I hit the plus symbol here, you'll notice that an index has appeared, and inside we are getting quite a lot of information. Now this may look very similar to our foliage type, in which case it for the most part is. It will basically control how much grass our density is going to be based off of how, like, our 10 square meters is how many of this grass mesh, which is a static mesh here, will be spawned over that 10 by 10 area. So we can have control over this, and we can also have control over when this will disappear. Now, a bit of a forewarning, I have done a couple tweaks to my foliage material, which is just the quixel mega scans. However, it is going to act differently. So, yeah, it will basically not really follow this 100%, but will kind of make it do that. So, and by following, I mean the call start and end distance, which is basically when the foliage will start to fade off. I will be making a video in the future about making a really good foliage shader for more variation and like how we can get more natural fall off as opposed to just cutting off. And of course we have some scale settings here, which will just randomize the scale and of course randomize the rotation. We'll kind of look at this other stuff later. But for now, let's go ahead and let's add a foliage piece. So the ones I'm using for this demo is I'm using the wild grass from Quixel. So if we go to Quixel right now, and this is just so you guys can follow along, is that if we go to the 3D plants, grass, what I'm using is this one, this wild grass, not so much this one, but we're using these two right here. So they're sort of a bit longer, and in my opinion they look a little bit nicer for this type of thing, but I just downloaded the medium quality and I have them in here. So what I'm going to do is I am going to add them to my foliage type. So now typically how I would do this is if I was doing the whole look dev process, I would go into one of my neutral scenes and make it there, which we'll do when we actually do the material. But for now, we're going to do it in here because this is more of the point of our project. So with that, I'm actually just going to select this first one, and I'm just going to come into our grass mesh and I'm just going to place it. So with it placed, I'm going to go back into our material for our landscape, and I'm going to just, with the landscape grass selected, I'm going to go into our grass type and I'm going to look for the one that we just created, which was the landscape grass demo. Now, if I hit apply, what should end up happening is nothing, because it's not actually looking at a layer anymore. It's not looking at anything, so it has no idea what to do. So what we're going to do is we're just going to point it towards a layer. And we can do that with a landscape layer sample. So with this, you have to name it precisely the same as the layer you want the landscape to paint on. Or, sorry, the grass to paint on. So with that, in this case, I want it to be layer 1. So I'm just going to go into our layer blend here for our landscape. And I'm going to go to layer 1. I'm just going to copy it. And I'm going to bring it down into the layer sample that we just created. And I'm just going to hit that. So it shows. And I'm just going to plug it in. And you'll notice when we go back to our scene that now a whole bunch of grass is spawned, right? And you can actually sort of see the effect of my custom shader with all the random color. And just so you guys know, when you see all this issues with the shadows, don't worry about it for now. There will be a video in the future where I'll kind of go over debugging it, but it's basically the virtual shadows, you know, maps, basically. So yeah, don't worry about it for now. But with this, is that you can see that it spawns all the same and it's all the same height, right? But it's also spawning everywhere, which is not great. This is not performant at all. And what we basically want is that we want it to only spawn where we tell it to spawn. And we can do that pretty easily. So what I'm going to do before we kind of dive into kind of going all crazy with customizing it is that we're just going to make sure that there's a layer inside of our layer blend that we're going to specify as the grass painting layer. So typically what I do is I always add an extra layer here, and I call it, basically it's going to be a copy of the layer that it's supposed to be painted on. So in other words, since this is going to be grass, which I know is on layer 1, I'm going to call this layer 1 underscore grass. And a little bit of a sneaky thing here that we can do, let me just rearrange this so that way it's up top here, is that I can grab this moss grass from layer 1, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to just place it into our layer 1 grass here. So that way, when I come down here and I rename it to grass, what should end up happening is that all our grass will disappear. Now, it will have a new layer now, as you can see here. And if I just add it, like in this case I already had one named that, so I'll just add this, is that when I paint it now, it's only going to show up where that landscape layer 1 grass is being painted. So I can actually do only selected areas, right? Which is fine, because honestly, like, you don't need the grass everywhere. Right? If you're doing a simple, like, say, cinematic scene, you only really need it in the vicinity of what the camera can see. You don't need it really far away, right? And if you do need it far away, there are ways of blending it. So there are a couple things we can do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just paint this area, you know, really quick, so that it works for my camera shot that I'm doing. So I'm going to just paint, go back into my camera, a little bit more. Yeah, there we go. So this is what it looks like by default. Another thing is like, you know, it's all right, but it's not that great. So there it is. So now that we have this, we can start going through our first step here. So going into our landscape demo, the first thing we typically want to do is we want to kind of think about not only its call distance and its density, but also its scale. Now check this out. So right now it's quite high, and I want this to kind of be default. So like the default layer, so it's not going to be tall grass, is I'm just going to set this to like say 0.35 to like 0.75. And you can see here it made quite a big difference. Don't worry about that. We can either do it this way, or I can just have it say from 0.5 to 1. And you can already see that it's adding a lot of variation. But we kind of want to play around with this value in order for it to kind of look good. And on top of that, we're going to play with the grass density. So right now it's relatively high. Let's set it to something like 200. Right, and you can see here that our grass is like a lot more sparse, and that's totally fine, because what we really care about here is that it's going to be not only optimal, but it's going to give us the idea of grass. Now, and by idea, I mean that it's not like it's bare. There's just enough to make it look natural. So we can play with this some more, right? We can set this to like say 0.25. Which I think is okay. And we can also start adding in a couple extra ones. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's add another of these foliage types. Let's add the SM Wildgrass Variation 16, right? And let's also do the same thing where we go 0.35 to 0.5, right? And we're starting to get some nice values there. Maybe I'll play around with this first one and change it so it becomes a different type of grass. See if there's one that works better for this scene. Like right now, it looks like a couple that are they're okay, right? But let's just say we go with this, right? I think this is okay. I do think I need to lower the value down to maybe like, yeah, like that. That's fine. Because this is going to be our default layer, so it's okay if it's a little bit short grass. And with that too, I'm just going to decrease the density as well to say 250, right? I'm also going to add a couple more options here. Maybe we can add this one. And we're also going to lower it again because, you know, it's a little insane. We can do 0.75 or even 0.35 to 0.75. And I think that's okay. And we can just lower this down as well. We can always play with this because it's organic, you know. So in this case, I'm bringing it down to like 150. And then I'm also going to add in a couple pieces that are going to sort of stand up a little bit. We'll just try a couple anyways. See how they look. Because we don't want to just have a whole bunch of stuff that does not look good. So let's go 0.35, 0.5. No, not that one. If anything, like what we'll do is that we'll just make this very sparse, maybe like 50 or 75. And when we kind of bring it in, we can actually sort of see kind of what it's doing here. So like that way we can sort of get an idea of what's being placed. So say this, I'm okay with this one. Yeah, let's go with this. So you can see that playing with like the values here is actually a really good idea. Because like it can even now, just like if we went from before and after, just how big of a difference it is. Like say, here's where we are now, and let's just go ahead and let's swap it out with that large one that I had before, right? Just even that difference here is huge, right? It's a huge difference, right? Just going from that one specific type. So let's say this is our default layer and we're super happy with it. Well, now what we're going to want to do is we want to do some wizardry when it comes to this. And very similar to how we did in the RGB mask tutorial, is we're going to use an RGB mask to drive what's being placed. So without further ado, let's go through the process of doing that. So I have in my folder here a really awesome thing called an RGB mask, which is just literally random noise in each slot, right? So there's 3 different variations. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this texture into my landscape material. And I'm just going to make it a parameter. And I'm going to call this, like, say, foliage variation. Foliage variation mask, right? Oop, let me do this. And with this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it tile across the entire world based off of my own, its world position. So what I'm going to get is I'm going to get the world position, and this, since this is 5.2, it's split up, but in 5.1 backward, it's going to be put together. So in this case, say we did not have this split up like we do, we could always do a component mask here and just get the red and green channel, which means the X and Y axis. Or since we're in 5.2, we can just pull off directly from the X and Y slot here. So what we're going to use this for is we're basically going to use the world position node to drive the scale of our foliage variation mask. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to get a divide node. And the reason why is I found this kind of manages scale a little bit better for me with world position. And we're just going to multiply it by a scalar. And we're going to call this, so say foliage global mask UV scale. And we're just going to set it to 1. But what we're going to do is we're going to add a multiplier to this, so it's 1,000. Now let me just plug it in so you can sort of see what it currently is looking like. It's very, very tiny, right? Well, when we add the divide node, watch what happens if I adjust this value, is that I'm going to set it to something like, say, 100, right? It's looking pretty good. If I set it to 1,000, right? Also looking all right. With 100 being sort of, it's still tiling. 1,000 is looking like it's pretty good, right? So so I don't have to have these high numbers. What I always do is I add this multiply in, so I can just set 1,000. So now that we've done the tiling, what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and straighten everything out. So we can either just go alignment here and pick things, but I'm just going to straighten connections with Q, which is the hotkey for it. And that's just to keep it tidy. Bring this in, wait, do it again. And I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to add this thing to the end called the channel parameter. Channel mask parameter, I should say. So in this, we'll just do R channel mask. Maybe we'll, oh, actually not R channel mask. Let's go say, but this will be large grass mask, right? And we're just going to make a copy for for flowers. Flower mask. And we're just going to hook it up. And I'm just going to change this red one to green by default. So you can see that it's actually using two different channels here. And the reason why I'm going to do this is because I want to separate them so I have more control. Now, we could either do it this way so that it tiles normally, right? Or we could do this a bit differently and literally duplicate this mask, which I'm actually going to do, and it will make sense in a second. And I'm just going to pull this out, and I'm going to hook up the flower mask to this base one. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually, instead of using this, I'm going to do, let's see, an add. And I'm going to just use this to drive any changes to the material. So if the add doesn't work, maybe we'll do another, like just a multiply. Yeah, might as well just do a multiply. And with this, you can see that it will just offset what we did, with larger numbers, of course, making it smaller. And the reason why I want to do this is because it's going to be able to control the size of the mask. Now, because we have this foliage global mask here, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to now make a large grass UV offset node right here. And what this will do is it'll allow me to scale it separately so I have a little bit finer control. And I'm also going to do the same with our flowers here. So I'm going to just make this one flower UV offset. And I'm going to plug in our divide node from our global UVs, which I'll just comment. And now, if we go and look at this, yeah, it's looking fine, is that we're going to go ahead and we're going to now create some mask tweaks, so that way we control the fall off as well as the intensity of the mask. So we can do this by getting a power node and a multiply. So the reason why we're getting a power node as opposed to a just a simple cheap contrast is because what ends up happening with this is that the colors end up getting crunched a lot more with the cheap contrast, whereas what this does is it's almost it's like it adjusts the gradient itself, so it's like a bias almost. So if I go say 1, 1.5, 2, right, you can see that it's gradually being crunched in, whereas what happens with the cheap contrast is that if we add a scalar here, it's at 0. If I go say 0.5, right, you can see that the value just gets horribly, horribly crunched right there and then. It's like it clips it. So if we're using something for contrast, we use a power node. So with this is I'm going to just copy the large grass UV offset here, and I'm going to call this large grass contrast. There we go. And I'm going to plug that in. And then under the multiply here, I'm just going to add a strength node. And with this, we're going to now use this against the landscape layer. So what we're going to do in order to make this clean, and so I don't have to do all this noodle stuff, is I'm going to just pull off of it. I'm going to make this thing called a name reroute declaration. And think about it like you have two cell phones, you're calling from over here, and the other phone is over here, right? So it's basically a wireless connection, if you want to think about it that way. So in here, I'm going to call this one large grass mask. Oh, and of course I'm not writing. Large grass mask. And I'm just going to bring it in over here by right-clicking, and now I have these name reroutes. So under here, I can just pull it, and now I got the node. So very useful for keeping things tidy. So in here, what I'm going to do is I don't simply want to have an extra grass layer here and just plug it right in. You know, this will work, right? Like say if I do it right now, but it's not going to care about what layer. And of course I crashed. Give me a moment. Okay, sorry about that. I actually had to quickly remake this because it crashed on me, which sucked. But yeah, so we were in the process of adding in our multiply node for our strength. So let's just go ahead and do that. 1 second. And I know that we were trying to add, you know, the grass to this, but that's what crashed it. So we won't worry about doing that example of showing it. But what would end up happening is that this would tile across pretty much the entire surface, and it just wasn't liking that. So what we'll do now is that we'll just go ahead and create our mask for strength, or our intensity for it. And just because I don't want to have to repeat this process again, I'm actually just going to copy my nodes and open Notepad. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to Control A and just paste it. And I'm going to just replace the large grass with the flowers. And I hit replace all. And, oh, by the way, you can do this by going to edit and replace. And what that will do is that it will change the name of our nodes automatically. So this could be very handy with larger things. Like if you had like entire node graphs where you have to change from grass to dirt, you know, that type of thing. But we made a name reroute. So we'll add this. We'll call this one large grass mask. We'll also just copy it and paste it and call this one flower mask. Put that in. And let's also make sure this is green. Yep. Hit apply. I'm just going to save it this time in case anything bad happens. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to basically still use this layer, but we want to basically subtract our default grass from where the large grass is going to be, right? So just so I can get a visual on this, let's go subtract, and we're going to just move all this stuff over to the side here. Is we're going to get our name reroute for large grass. Let's plug it in. And I'm going to just put it into our default grass here and watch what happens. So what should end up happening is that the grass should end up disappearing from those spots. So say if I open up my material here and I go down to my large grass contrast, I set this to like say 2, and I make it like very strong so that it becomes very obvious what it's doing. And I'm just going to set the scale to like say 2, 5, right? And what should end up being able to be seen is that the area is basically stopping grass from growing in those spots. So it's very cool. But we're going to want to spawn some larger ones, right? So in this case, just for the sake of like the length of this, I'm actually just going to add in, like say, my grass large that I made earlier. Because what we're basically doing now is that we're just going to be doing the mask as opposed to the placement, because we already kind of went over how to kind of randomize things. And in this case, I did the exact same thing we did with large grass. But from here, what we actually want to do is we want to multiply now the the layer sample by our large grass. So what we're basically doing is we're making sure like default grass will never spawn where large grass is, and that large grass will only spawn where the mask is. So that way we're not getting anything doubled up. So let's just input that. And inside of it, you can see that more have spawned. They're a lot smaller, that's for sure. So it's not really large grass, now that I remember. But grass default, I think I had better settings on. Yeah, so you can see here where it's actually spawning with the mask is that it's all spawning in areas that are being used. So I have the large UVs here. If I set this to 1, you can see that now they're spawning in a lot larger space, right? So if I set this to, like, say 0.1, right, its size is pretty big now, right, in terms of where it can spawn. Whereas if I set this to, like, say 1, it's by default now, so it comes in these little clumps. So I'm just going to set the 0.5 because I actually like the bigger ones. But you can see I have contrast here. Let me just take these off and do, say, 0.6. So you can see here now the mask is a lot less intense. So if you want it to be more intense, it's a good idea to actually, like, increase the strength. So say I set it to 5. Now you can see that there's a lot more grass coming in. But if I increase the mask intensity, now that grass is going to be sharper in a lot sharper areas. So if I set this to 2, or even 1.5 was good. Yeah, 1.5. I like that, right? So now it's, like, spawning in this area a lot better, right? And if we look through our camera, like we were doing, is that now there's a lot more variety where it is. And we can even go into our landscape grass again. In this case, it was not large. It was our default. And right here, we can actually go ahead and we can even randomize this further by setting some things to, like, say 0.1. Other things to, yeah, let's get a lot of variation out of this, right? So we can set our scales relatively low, right, in this case. And I'm just literally doing exactly what we just did with our demo. The only difference is I'm just going in and I'm adjusting our scale now on these things. Is that, like, in this case I have just different grass foliage, and I'm just playing with the values here. And now you can see how well that has broken everything up and made it look quite nice. But you might have seen that there's this difference between this grass here and this grass in terms of darkness, right? Well, that's actually because of the effect distance field lighting that is in 5.2 that's available for landscape grass. So if we do distant field lighting, we can just turn this on. I mean, this is in the default layer, but we're just going to do this. So that way it actually gets shadowed properly. Let's just do this. Some more. And this will help with the shadowing. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do the same with our demo landscape that we made, or demo landscape grass. So we'll do distant field lighting. So let's actually see here what happens. Is that, oh, you see that difference? It's probably really subtle on your end, but yeah, it's this one for this guy here, is that it does quite a bit when it comes to the shadows and making it look a lot better. Now if we go into our camera again, that's looking really nice, right? And we just literally did two layers of this. Well, just one actually in this sense, but you know, we can do a lot more with it, obviously, as we go. So, well, I have this, and now if I just go and I paint, right now, you're seeing that they're automatically being added, and the mask is automatically tiling it out, just like that, right? And it's doing a really fantastic job of it. So, so yeah, there's that. And then, of course, if we wanted to make it look a little bit more crunched, if that makes sense, is like to the point where it gets a bit better fall off, right? We can always scale down our UVs to, say, 0.5 on this one, and also change our mask intensity. So now there's much more more clumping for the large grass, and the smaller grass is now being used a lot more in those areas. So with this, we can also, like, say, scale down our master here. So like if we say set this to 2, we're basically changing the size of it, you can see, right? And then, of course, we have flowers that we can add, right? And we can also add bushes if we wanted to, very much the same way. But for this, what we'll do is we'll also increase, like, say, the amount that's being spawned through the smaller grass. So like we can set it to 350, and just increase it enough so that way there's at least a little bit of density to it without completely making it sparse, right? And I think it's doing pretty good. Yeah, I think that's looking really nice. Now the other thing is, like I mentioned, is that we want bushes. So we can actually have it so that we can now, say, multiply a mask that we've made based off of a mask that already existed. So let's go ahead and let's just copy this values that we just created and go to the notepad. Let's do a Control-Z there, and I copied, and instead of large grass, I'm going to call it shrubs. And replace all. Let's see here if that worked. No, it did not. It's flowers. Okay. So we'll do that. And now if we come back, now it should say shrubs like it does. That's awesome. And then we're just going to do our offset there, and the flower mask for some reason. Oh yeah, it's because it's a different name. We'll do shrub mask. And now what we'll do is that I only want it to spawn where it's sparse. So we're going to actually just multiply off of this subtract like that. And then we're going to get our mask. And what this should do if we come to like our array elements here and say if you do have like a shrub that you can add, you can now add it here, right? And it's the same process. That's why I'm not going and remaking it, but it's the same process. It's just these ones are pre-made, and I spent the time to kind of go in and make it look good. But now you can see that now it's also spawning bushes only where we want it, based off of, you know, the mask. So if let me get out of here and go to landscape instance, we can now go into our shrubs and say in my contrast I want it at 2. So it's still very sparse, and maybe the strength, or even 3, make it very, very, you know, very much so. And I'm also just going to set this to 0.25. Let's go into our camera, because I don't necessarily want the shrubs in my shot. That's why they weren't there before. But we can do, yeah, you know what? I like sort of how they're over the hill. I think that's okay. You know, and then a little bit here. So I think that adds a nice little bit, at least for that. Otherwise, I'll take it off. But we can also, from here, you know, now that we have that, we can further multiply it if we wanted to. But since we have this, let's also talk about how a couple kind of neat tricks we can do when it comes to painting other layers, right? So first, I'm going to add another landscape grass to this, only this one's going to be rocks. So I'm going to add a new one for rock, and I'm going to add this one that I prepared for dirt rocks. Now, you don't only need to have one layer sample. You can have as many as you'd like, for as many different layers as you'd want. So in this case, I want it for dirt. And with dirt, what I want is I want to basically have rocks only spawn when the dirt is present. So if we look at this, right, I'm going to just go to my landscape and I'm going to start painting with my dirt, right? And you can see here now it's spawning rocks, and now other areas are now thinning and more rocks are spawning there. But let's say, I want to say that this is not a good way of painting. Never paint this way, like unless it's like your initial layout. What I do is I use the pattern brush in our painting. Now check this out. So you see how I can add a texture here? Well, this texture I can set to world space. Now you can see here is it basically creates this giant pattern, right? Now I always use this tool for breakup. Watch this. So I can just add dirt basically where it's white, right? Where you're seeing it here, and it's going to paint it there, and it's always going to paint it there based off of my repeat size. Now what makes this great is I can come in here now and I can add a little bit of breakup with the dirt coming into here. And this does such an amazing job when it comes to being able to add in a lot of variation. And it's not just with the dirt that we can do this. We can also do this with you know, our actual foliage brush, right? So say if we had it really dense, we could always just come in, make this a lot larger, and we can go to our grass and we can just stamp where we want it, and we get even further variation because now it's only going to apply it to where our stamp is, right? And then since it's, you know, also very varied with this, is that we can also just now switch back to our dirt and make this a lot smaller. And then now we can add, say, even more breakup to it, right? Just like that. And of course, it does a pretty good job. And you can see that this is our landscape right now, right? And of course, we can actually make it a little bit denser here too, because I painted it off, right? Same up here. Is that I can actually make a couple clicks, make it look pretty nice, right? And there you go, right? It does the job, but we still haven't spawned our flowers yet, right? So let's go ahead and add another layer. And this one is going to be, yeah, you guessed it, the flowers, because I just said it. Sorry. Is we're going to go and we're going to spawn it based off of our flower mask, which in this case, what I want with the flowers is that I want it to spawn everywhere, but probably not under the shrubs. So I'm just going to multiply the mask by the flowers, right? And we're going to now just do a subtract. And we're going to subtract our shrubs. And we're going to put that into flower. So what this should do is that it will make sure that there's no overlap between those ones, but there's going to be an overlap between our other layers, right? So if we go into our landscape, our landscape material here, and we go and paint in our flowers now. So let's say in this case, I want it to be a much more denser flowers. Let's go 5 for this. So we have a lot more coming in. I think 3 actually. And let's set it to 2, maybe even 5. Let's get this really intense. So you can see here that it's adding a lot of flowers to areas that are in both the large and the large as well as short, right? And if we wanted to change that, all we have to do is instead of multiplying it by the grass here, we can just literally multiply it by our our resulting mask of the large grass, just like that. So if we look at this, let me just make this a little bit cleaner for us, and then I'll comment everything so you guys can get a better idea. Is that we're just going to press save, and we're just going to comment it. So what this is doing is that it's getting weight of layer and making a black and white mask, right? Then what we're doing right here is we're also mask applying default grass type. Then in this one, what we're doing is that we're subtracting large grass, so short grass doesn't spawn in that area. I know, long comment, but it will make sense. So, and then here it will be taking, so only adding large grass to the layer based on black and white mat, a multiplied black and white mask, right? And then what we're doing here is that we're just shrubs only spawn where default grass is, right? And then here, flowers only spawn in tall grass, right? My naming convention is crap, but yeah, that basically sums it up. Is that we're just making sure that this all works, right? And you can see that we may not even need actually this subtract because we're already avoiding that area. So we could just remove this node and it should be fine. But that's basically it for the material. So in a couple ways of like we can paint, right? So like with here, you can see that it's done quite a bit to the landscape that really added quite a bit to how this is done, right? And of course, we can always do more tweaks with it and, you know, add on top of it. And of course, like PCGs are a new thing now, but like I'll do a video on that actually right after I finish this one, is that there are still a couple issues with it. And I'll show you guys how to get something similar to this with PCGs. And it's not going to be like what you think. It's actually kind of, it's going to be all texture based. But that's about it. So thank you guys for joining this other video here. I hope it was worthwhile and you learned something. And if you're a newcomer to this channel, I am trying to grow it, and I would appreciate the like and subscribe. I am going to be doing at least 2 videos a week, and I hope that content obviously is going to be really good for you guys. But until then, have a great day.